admissible evidence linking him to unrest in Nigeria. This major legal victory in Washington, D.C. weakens the foundation of the charges against him in the Finnish court. Since the Finnish court had relied on the U.S. case to build its charges, the removal of Simon Ekpa'S name from the U.S. case could lead to the dismissal of the charges in Finland, where he is facing legal issues including tax evasion and alleged incitement. On June 25, 2025, Simon Ekpa'S tax evasion case was thrown out in Finland within 2 hours. His supporters argue that gifts sent to him by Biafran citizens should not be taxed as income, calling the charges politically motivated. Dr. David Yonor Masanga, a Kenyan human rights activist and lawyer, played a major role in defending both Simon Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu. He filed petitions against the governments of Finland and Kenya, helping to expose legal violations and fight for justice. The East African Court ruled that Nnamdi Kanu's abduction from Kenya in 2021 was illegal and awarded him 10 million Kenyan shillings, about 120 million naira, in damages. The judgment emphasized the need to respect international law and due process. Meanwhile, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United States of Biafra, Dr. Ngozi Oruebweze, revealed new Biafran banknotes featuring the faces of Simon Ekpa and another Biafran leader. However, the absence of Nnamdi Kanu's image caused backlash from supporters who felt he was being sidelined. Many Biafrans criticized the new currency, especially the decision to exclude Nnamdi Kanu's image. The reaction sparked internal controversy within the United States of Biafra movement, with some accusing Dr. Ngozi Oruebweze of trying to undermine genuine freedom fighters. Dr. Ngozi Oruebweze's close ally, Kendra, was appointed chair of the DeKalb Republican Party, further cementing ties between the United States of Biafra and powerful political figures in the United States, including those associated with President Donald Trump. Nigerian blogger Jealous, who was imprisoned in 2024 for defaming a Lagos-based pastor, was released after spending a year in prison. His detention was cited as an example of why activists like Nnamdi Kanu and Simon Ekpa seek an independent Biafran nation. Simon Ekpa's legal team recently filed a fresh bail application, arguing he is not a flight risk. The Finnish court has delayed a decision for 2 weeks. The outcome will determine whether Simon Ekpa remains in detention or is released ahead of trial. It was a moment that many supporters of the Biafran independence movement will remember for a long time, not just because of the relief it brought, but also because of the questions it raised. On June the 28th, 2025, an important legal milestone unfolded quietly but powerfully in the capital city of the United States of America. In a courtroom located in Washington, D.C., within the walls of a federal building that had been the center of many political and legal controversies in recent years, the name of Simon Nyoku Ekpa was officially removed from a lawsuit that had been filed by the Nigerian government. This single action by a judge working within the judicial system, established under the leadership of President Donald John Trump, sent ripple effects across continents, from the cities of Finland to the hills of Abia State in southeastern Nigeria, and from the rural communities of Imo State to the diplomatic halls of Kenya. For those unfamiliar with the unfolding drama, Simon Nyoku Ekpa has been one of the most outspoken figures in the Biafran movement, a movement that seeks the self-determination and eventual independence of the southeastern region of Nigeria, which many of its citizens believe has been neglected, oppressed, and violently targeted for decades. A former athlete turned legal professional and political activist, Simon Nyoku Ekpa had been residing in Finland, where he gained political asylum years ago. Over time, he rose to become a voice of resistance, using social media platforms, press interviews, and speeches to call for civil disobedience and other forms of protest in Nigeria. For this reason, he became a thorn in the side of the Nigerian government. The authorities in Nigeria accused him of inciting violence, sponsoring civil unrest, and even causing economic disruption through stay-at-home orders that he broadcasted from his home in Lahti, Finland. The Finnish government, under pressure from Nigeria and other international actors, had launched an investigation into Simon Nyoku Ekpa. He was accused of multiple charges, ranging from tax evasion to incitement of violence. But Behind these legal accusations were political tensions that could not be ignored. Many of his supporters believed that the charges were an attempt to silence him and disrupt the momentum of the Biafran independence movement. His critics, on the other hand, argued that his words had inspired violence, even if he never directly called for it. But whatever side one stood on, the case in Finland became deeply tied to another legal process happening thousands of kilometers away, one based in the United States of America. The Nigerian government, in a bold and unprecedented move, had filed a federal lawsuit in Washington, D.C., aiming to link Simon Nyoku Ekpa to crimes against public order and the peace of the Nigerian state. They hoped that by framing the issue as an international matter involving the misuse of digital communication platforms and financial channels, they could sway global opinion and justify further legal actions against him. The United States court in Washington, D.C. took up the case, and for months there was silence. No press release, no leaked documents, no breaking news headlines. But those who followed the case closely knew that this court's decision would determine the fate of Simon Nyoku Ekpa in many other jurisdictions, especially in Finland, where prosecutors had been leaning heavily on the assumption that a U.S. court would support the Nigerian narrative. So when the United States District Court in Washington, D.C. ruled that there was no admissible evidence directly linking Simon Nyoku Ekpa to any acts of violence or unrest in Nigeria, it was a crushing blow to the Nigerian legal team and a moment of vindication for Simon Nyoku Ekpa's defense. His name was formally removed from the lawsuit. The judge made it clear that freedom of expression, even if provocative, could not be criminalized unless there was tangible, admissible, and lawful evidence of direct criminal activity. The ruling did not just clear Simon Nyoku Ekpa's name in that jurisdiction. It also shook the foundations of the Finnish case. If the entire basis of the Finnish charges rested on the US legal proceedings, then the logic followed that the Finnish case would also begin to unravel. Back in Finland, there had already been signs that the charges were losing steam. Just 3 days before the US court ruling on June the 25th, 2025, Simon Nyoku Ekpa had appeared in a Finnish courtroom to answer to one of the many allegations brought against him. This time, it was a charge related to tax evasion. Prosecutors argued that money he received from Biafran citizens around the world in support of his activities should be treated as income and taxed accordingly. But his legal team, composed of Finnish lawyers as well as international human rights consultants, argued that the money came as personal gifts from supporters, much like donations to a political movement. They insisted that such contributions could not be classified as taxable income. The judge, after only 2 hours of deliberation, dismissed the case entirely. It was a clear victory. The courtroom was filled with both relief and applause, though such reactions were quickly silenced by Finnish officials in the name of decorum. The swiftness of the verdict stunned many observers, especially considering how long the case had been pending. Outside the courthouse, supporters of Simon Nyoku Ekpa waved Biafran flags and held placards with his face and slogans demanding freedom, justice, and an end to political persecution. They believed the charges were nothing more than a tool used to break the spirit of a man they saw as a modern-day freedom fighter. They also believed that the dismissal of the tax case marked the beginning of a broader unraveling of what they called a politically motivated legal war against their leader. One of the key figures supporting Simon Nyoku Ekpa and providing legal assistance behind the scenes was Dr. David Yonor Masanga, a Kenyan human rights lawyer and activist with years of experience in political cases across Africa. Dr. David Yonor Masanga was not new to controversy. He had spent years investigating political abductions, illegal detentions, and media suppression in countries like Uganda, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. In the case of Simon Nyoku Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu, he believed that international law had been violated repeatedly, and he filed petitions at multiple levels, including with the European Court of Human Rights and various East African judicial bodies. His involvement brought more credibility to the case and helped to expose what he called systemic persecution by collusion between governments. Dr. David Yonor Masanga also represented the interests of Nnamdi Kanu, the detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra. Nnamdi Kanu had been abducted from Nairobi, Kenya, in 2021 in what many now refer to as an extraordinary rendition. His supporters maintained that he had been unlawfully taken by Nigerian security forces in violation of international law and flown to Nigeria, where he was held in solitary confinement under the custody of the Department of State Services. For years, international human rights organizations had been calling for an investigation into his abduction. Finally, in 2025, the East African Court issued a landmark judgment. They ruled that the arrest and forced transportation of Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya to Nigeria was illegal. The court awarded him 10 million Kenyan shillings as compensation, which at the time equaled about 120 million naira. The judgment was not just symbolic. It was a direct message to governments that even powerful states must respect due process and international law. Meanwhile, in the newly declared United States of Biafra, which existed more in spirit and hope than as a fully recognized nation-state, political developments continued. Dr. Ngozi Orabueze, the Deputy Prime Minister of the self-proclaimed United States of Biafra, had announced the release of new currency banknotes. These banknotes featured the images of prominent Biafran leaders, including Simon Nyoku Ekpa. But the absence of Nnamdi Kanu's image sparked immediate outrage among supporters who saw the omission as a deliberate attempt to sideline the man who had, in their view, sacrificed more than anyone else for the Biafran cause. The backlash was swift and emotional. Protesters in Imo State and Anambra State tore down banners and refused to accept the new banknotes, claiming they would only recognize a currency that bore the face of their true leader. The controversy over the currency turned into a larger debate about the direction of the Biafran movement. Some supporters accused Dr. Ngozi Orabueze of trying to rewrite history and position herself and Simon Nyoku Ekpa as the sole leaders of the movement. Others defended her, saying that strategic decisions sometimes required compromise and pragmatism. What could not be denied was that the new currency reignited tensions within the leadership structure of the Biafran independence effort, creating fresh divisions at a time when unity was needed most. The tensions were further complicated by the rise of Kendra, a close political ally of Dr. Ngozi Orabueze, who had recently been appointed chair of the DeKalb Republican Party in the United States. The appointment was seen by many as part of a broader effort to build stronger ties between the Biafran leadership abroad and the political machinery of the United States, particularly the faction loyal to former President Donald John Trump. While some saw this alliance as opportunistic, others viewed it as a masterstroke of diplomacy that could open the door to future recognition of the Biafran cause at the highest levels of global politics. As the noise and debates over the controversial Biafran currency continued to echo across Biafran communities in Nigeria and abroad, the release of Simon Nyoku Ekpa's name from the United States District Court docket sent a wave of mixed emotions through these same circles. Supporters in Finland, Germany, the United Kingdom, and even as far as Australia took to social media to celebrate what they described as a divine vindication. Videos of people dancing in the streets, singing liberation songs in Igbo language, and waving Biafran flags quickly surfaced online. Some called the court's ruling a spiritual turning point, referring to Simon Nyoku Ekpa as the chosen vessel who had faced international persecution only to emerge stronger. However, not everyone was rejoicing. There were segments within the Biafran community who continued to view Simon Nyoku Ekpa's rising profile with suspicion. These individuals questioned his strategies, his alliances, and more recently, his refusal to explicitly prioritize the release of Nnamdi Kanu in all of his public statements. Some critics accused him of shifting focus from the original struggle to his personal agenda. Others felt that, with his recent recognition by some political circles in the United States, he had begun to seek diplomatic validation at the cost of grassroots loyalty. These tensions were magnified after Simon Nyoku Ekpa's image appeared on the newly released Biafran banknotes, while that of Nnamdi Kanu was conspicuously missing. Still, the momentum created by his victory in the United States District Court could not be denied. In Finland, where the charges against Simon Nyoku Ekpa had been expected to lead to a full-blown trial, the legal tides appeared to be turning in his favor. His legal team, encouraged by the the United States ruling, filed a new bail application, arguing that Simon Njoku Ekpa posed no flight risk and had demonstrated respect for legal procedures. The Finnish court acknowledged receipt of the application, but postponed its decision by 2 weeks. The delay frustrated his supporters, who gathered outside the courtroom daily, chanting songs and demanding his unconditional release. Many of them wore customized T-shirts bearing the words, "Let our voice go free," along with images of both Simon Njoku Ekpa and Nnamdi Kanu. Amidst this growing international attention, the story of another political victim began to resurface. Jelus, a Nigerian blogger known for his blunt criticism of political and religious leaders, had been jailed in 2024 for publishing a report alleging corruption by a popular pastor based in Lagos State. After spending a full year in prison, Jelus was quietly released with no formal apology or compensation. His story gained traction once again as many Biafrans cited his case as a clear example of why activists like Nnamdi Kanu and Simon Njoku Ekpa had called for an independent state. For supporters of Biafra, the imprisonment of Jelus was symbolic of the wider oppression they believed the Nigerian government was unleashing on those who dared to speak out. The mention of Jelus reminded people of the broader landscape of political repression, censorship, and civil rights violations in Nigeria. In communities like Aba in Abia State, Onitsha in Anambra State, and Owerri in Imo State, public discussions increasingly revolved around topics of freedom, justice, and sovereignty. Market women debated the significance of the court ruling in Washington, D.C., while young people in internet cafes followed every tweet and video update from Finland and the United States. Churches began including special prayer requests for the release of Nnamdi Kanu and the safety of Simon Njoku Ekpa during their weekly services.
You don't see them, and they have had, yes,